Some secrets refuse to die. Nearly 80 years after the last shots were fired, World War II still holds mysteries that keep historians awake at night. We're talking about vanished treasures worth billions, people who disappeared without a trace, and events so bizarre they sound like fiction. But here's the thing. Every single one of these stories is real. Tonight, we're diving into 4 mysteries that have stumped experts for decades. From a battle that might never have happened to a palace made of gold that vanished into thin air. These aren't your typical history lessons. These are the stories they couldn't explain, the cases they couldn't close, and the secrets that died with the people who knew the truth. The war may have ended in 1945, but for these mysteries, the clock is still ticking. February 25th, 1942. Los Angeles. It's 2:25 in the morning, and the city is about to lose its mind. Just 2 months earlier, Pearl Harbor had shattered America's sense of security. The West Coast was on edge, jumping at shadows, waiting for the next attack. And that night, they thought it had arrived. Air raid sirens screamed across the city. Searchlights stabbed through the darkness, scanning the skies above Southern California. Then the guns opened up. Anti-aircraft batteries unleashed everything they had, firing over 1,400 shells into the night sky. The noise was deafening. Explosions lit up the darkness like a deadly fireworks show. Residents watched from their windows, terrified, as tracer rounds streaked overhead and shrapnel rained down on the streets below. The gunfire lasted for over an hour. Newspapers ran dramatic photos the next day showing searchlights converging on mysterious objects in the sky. The military claimed they'd been shooting at enemy aircraft, somewhere between 1 and 5 planes depending on who you asked. But here's where it gets weird. They didn't shoot down a single plane. Not one piece of wreckage was ever found. No bombs were dropped on the city. No enemy aircraft were confirmed in the area. So what were they shooting at? The official explanation came later. A weather balloon. The Navy Secretary claimed the whole thing was a case of war nerves, that jumpy gunners had opened fire on nothing and everyone else just followed along. But that explanation has some serious holes in it. 1,400 shells fired at a weather balloon? Experienced military personnel unable to identify a simple balloon? Multiple radar contacts reported before the shooting started? The pieces don't fit together cleanly. Some witnesses swore they saw objects in the sky that night, things that moved unlike any aircraft they'd ever seen. The searchlights definitely locked onto something. Those famous newspaper photos show the beams all converging on a central point. But what that point was remains unclear. Theories have multiplied over the decades. Some claimed it was a genuine Japanese reconnaissance mission that somehow escaped, without a trace. Others pointed to experimental aircraft or equipment malfunctions. The more creative explanations involved things the military supposedly didn't want to discuss publicly. What makes this mystery even stranger is the timing. This happened during the most paranoid period of the war on American soil. Military officials were under enormous pressure to protect the coast and reassure a terrified public. Admitting they'd wasted over 1,000 shells on nothing, or worse, admitting they couldn't identify what they'd been shooting at, would have been a public relations disaster. 5 civilians died that night, mostly from heart attacks and car accidents during the chaos. Unexploded shells damaged buildings across the city. The financial cost ran into the millions. All for a battle that may never have actually happened. The Japanese later confirmed they had no aircraft anywhere near Los Angeles that night. The military stuck to their weather balloon story, but even they seemed uncomfortable with it. Documents from the period show confusion and conflicting reports about what exactly occurred. Here's what we know for certain. Something triggered a massive military response in one of America's largest cities. Whatever it was remains unidentified to this day. The Battle of Los Angeles entered the history books as one of the war's most bizarre incidents, a night when an entire city went to war with an enemy that may not have been there at all. But while Los Angeles was shooting at shadows, very real threats were looming elsewhere. And one of those threats was about to steal something that would never be seen again. Imagine walking into a room where the walls themselves are made of gold and amber. Not painted gold, actually constructed from 6 tons of amber panels backed with gold leaf. The kind of room that takes your breath away, that seems to glow with its own light. A room so magnificent that people called it the 8th wonder of the world. That room existed, and then it vanished. The Amber Room was built in the early 1700s in Prussia, a masterpiece of Baroque art that took a decade to create. Eventually, it ended up in the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, Russia, where it became the crown jewel of the royal residence. Visitors would stand in stunned silence, surrounded by walls of honey-colored amber, inlaid with mirrors, precious stones, and intricate carvings. The room covered more than 590 square feet. Its value today? Conservatively estimated at over $500 million. Then came June 1941, Operation Barbarossa. Germany launched its invasion of the Soviet Union, and Nazi troops swept toward Leningrad. The Soviets tried desperately to save the Amber Room. They attempted to dismantle it, to hide it, to protect it somehow. But amber is incredibly fragile. It had been sitting in that palace for over 2 centuries, and the panels had become brittle with age. When workers tried to remove them, the amber started to crumble in their hands. So they tried something else. They covered the walls with wallpaper, hoping the Germans wouldn't notice what lay beneath. It didn't work. Nazi soldiers recognized the room immediately. They brought in experts who carefully dismantled what Soviet workers couldn't. Within 36 hours, the entire Amber Room was packed into 27 crates and shipped to Königsberg, Germany, now Kaliningrad, Russia. For 3 years, the room was displayed in Königsberg Castle. Visitors came to see the looted treasure, the prize piece of Nazi conquests. Then came 1944, and the tide of war turned. Allied bombers pounded German cities. The castle took hit after hit. Officials reportedly moved the Amber Room to the castle's basement for protection, and that's where the trail goes cold. In April 1945, Soviet forces captured Königsberg. They searched the castle, looking for their stolen treasure. They found nothing. The room had disappeared. Some said it burned in the bombing raids. Others claimed Nazi officials had hidden it before the Soviets arrived. A few whispered that it had been loaded onto a ship that sank in the Baltic Sea. The search became an obsession. Soviet investigators interrogated Nazi officials, followed every lead, dug up countless sites. They found exactly nothing. German records had been destroyed or scattered. The people who knew the room's location were either dead or weren't talking. Decades passed. Treasure hunters across Europe became convinced they knew where the Amber Room was hidden. They searched caves, mines, bunkers, and castle cellars. Some claimed to have found pieces, a few fragments that might or might not have been authentic. But the room itself remained lost. One of the most persistent theories involved a secret Nazi bunker system. As Germany collapsed, high-ranking officials supposedly moved their most valuable looted treasures to hidden locations, planning to retrieve them after the war. The Amber Room, according to this theory, was too valuable to destroy and too dangerous to leave in Königsberg. So they moved it one final time. But where? That's the billion-dollar question. Some pointed to mines in the Ore Mountains. Others believed it was hidden in underground tunnels beneath Königsberg itself. A few investigators became convinced it had been taken to Austria or Poland or even Bavaria. Each theory had its supporters, its supposed evidence, its moments where discovery seemed just around the corner. In 1997, German police recovered a single mosaic panel from the Amber Room. It had been stolen by a German soldier and kept hidden for decades. That panel proved at least some pieces had survived. But where was the rest? The Russian government eventually gave up waiting. In 1979, they started building a replica, using old photographs and detailed descriptions. It took 24 years and cost roughly $11 million. Today, that replica sits in the Catherine Palace, stunning visitors just like the original once did. But it's not the same. The real Amber Room, with its centuries of history and its irreplaceable craftsmanship, is still out there somewhere. Or it was destroyed decades ago, and we'll never know for certain. Here's what makes this mystery particularly haunting. If the room survived, it's been hidden for over 75 years. Any Nazi officials who might have known its location are long dead. Documents have been lost or destroyed. The room could be sitting in a sealed chamber somewhere, perfectly preserved, waiting to be discovered. Or it could have been reduced to ash in 1945. The search continues, even today. Every few years, someone announces they've found a new lead, discovered a new hiding spot, uncovered evidence pointing to a specific location. Teams spend months digging, scanning, searching. They find old bottles, forgotten furniture, wartime debris. But not the Amber Room. 6 tons of amber and gold, one of the greatest artistic achievements of the 18th century, vanished during the chaos of war. The greatest art heist in history, and nobody knows who pulled it off or where the treasure ended up. The Amber Room became a ghost, a legend, a mystery that refuses to be solved. But at least that room was real, something people could touch and see and verify existed. Our next mystery involves something far more difficult to pin down, something witnesses swore they saw but couldn't explain, something that chased pilots through the night sky and defied every law of physics they understood. The year is 1944. You're a bomber pilot over Germany, focused on your mission, when suddenly your co-pilot grabs your arm. He's pointing out the window at something that shouldn't exist. Glowing balls of light are pacing your aircraft, not following from a distance, flying right alongside you, matching your speed perfectly. They're not shooting, not attacking, just watching. This wasn't one isolated incident. This happened hundreds of times to Allied pilots throughout the war. They called them Foo Fighters, a name borrowed from a comic strip. The term became a catch-all for any mysterious aerial phenomenon they couldn't explain. And, brother, there was a lot they couldn't explain. Pilots reported spheres of light in every color you can imagine: orange, red, white, green. Sometimes they appeared alone, sometimes in formations. They'd approach aircraft at speeds that seemed impossible, execute maneuvers no plane could pull off, then vanish without a trace. Experienced aviators, men who'd logged thousands of hours, watched these things pace their bombers and had absolutely no idea what they were looking at. The military took this seriously. These weren't random civilians reporting weird lights. These were trained observers, men whose job was to identify aircraft and threats. Intelligence officers investigated every report, trying to figure out what was going on up there. The first theory? Enemy weapons. Some kind of German secret technology designed to interfere with Allied aircraft or bomber formations. But here's the problem with that theory. The objects never actually did anything. They didn't shoot, didn't jam equipment, didn't cause any damage. They just appeared, flew around for a while, then left. What kind of weapon just watches you? Then Allied investigators discovered something interesting. German and Japanese pilots were reporting the same phenomena. They were seeing the mysterious lights too, and they thought the objects were Allied secret weapons. Both sides were blaming each other for something neither of them created. So if it wasn't German technology, and it wasn't Allied technology, what was it? The explanations got creative. Ball lightning, atmospheric phenomena, reflections from ice crystals. Each theory had problems. Ball lightning doesn't follow aircraft in formation. Atmospheric effects don't execute controlled maneuvers. Ice crystals don't change direction. Some reports were probably misidentifications. Wartime skies were chaotic, full of aircraft, flak, searchlights, and other hazards. In that environment, it's easy to see something unusual and not be able to identify it properly. But that explanation doesn't cover all the cases. Too many reports came from multiple witnesses on the same aircraft. Too many described similar characteristics, the way these objects moved, how they responded to the planes, their apparent intelligence. The Foo Fighters became one of those mysteries the military quietly filed away after the war. No satisfactory explanation was ever published. The reports gradually faded as people moved on to other concerns. But pilots who'd seen these things never forgot. They knew what they'd witnessed, even if they couldn't explain it. And the Foo Fighters weren't the only phantom in the sky during those years. There was also the case of the Ghost P-40, December 8, 1942, exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor. A P-40 fighter crashes in the California desert. Recovery crews rush to the scene, expecting to find the usual aftermath of an aircraft accident. Instead, they find something that makes no sense whatsoever. The pilot is dead in the cockpit, but his blood is still fresh. The aircraft systems show signs of being recently active. The plane looks like it just crashed minutes ago. There's only one problem. This aircraft vanished during the Pearl Harbor attack a full year earlier. It had been listed as destroyed, the pilot as killed in action. Yet here it was, a year later, crashing in California with a dead pilot whose body showed no signs of being deceased for 12 months. How does a plane destroyed in Hawaii show up a year later in California? Where had it been for those 12 months? What happened to the pilot? The military investigated but found no answers. The incident was classified, buried in paperwork, forgotten by everyone except the people who'd seen it firsthand. Some tried to explain it as a case of mistaken identification. Maybe the plane wasn't actually the one lost at Pearl Harbor. Maybe records got mixed up, but the aircraft serial numbers matched. The pilot was positively identified. This was the same plane, the same man, showing up a year after they'd both supposedly been destroyed. Theories ranged from the mundane to the outright bizarre. Had the plane somehow stayed airborne for a year on autopilot before finally coming down? Impossible. It would have run out of fuel in hours. Had someone found the wreckage, recovered it, and staged the crash site? Why would anyone do that, and how would they preserve the pilot's body? The Ghost P-40 joined the Foo Fighters in that growing file of unexplained wartime phenomena. Events that happened, that were documented and witnessed, but that defied rational explanation. The military preferred to ignore these cases rather than admit they couldn't solve them. World War II produced millions of documents, countless reports, endless after-action summaries. But scattered throughout those files are cases like these, incidents that don't fit the narrative, phenomena that shouldn't have occurred, mysteries that remain unsolved. The Foo Fighters and the Ghost plane are just two examples. There are dozens more, each one stranger than the last. What makes these cases particularly frustrating is the lack of physical evidence. The Foo Fighters never left wreckage. The Ghost P-40's body and aircraft were allegedly handled according to standard military procedure, which means they were disposed of or buried decades ago. We're left with reports, testimonies, and second-hand accounts. Enough to know something strange happened, not enough to prove what it was. These aerial mysteries represent the chaos and confusion of wartime. When death fills the skies and technology pushes beyond previous limits, strange things happen. Some of them can be explained later. Some of them never get explained at all. The Foo Fighters and the Ghost plane fall into that second category. Phenomena witnessed by credible observers, documented in official records, but never satisfactorily solved. But while mysterious lights puzzled pilots and ghost planes crashed in deserts, the war's biggest names were creating mysteries of their own. And none would prove more enduring than the questions surrounding the final hours of Adolf Hitler himself. April 30th, 1945. Berlin is burning. Soviet artillery pounds the city into rubble. The Third Reich, which was supposed to last 1,000 years, is dying after just 12. And somewhere beneath the Reich Chancellery, in a concrete bunker 50 feet underground, Adolf Hitler is about to become the center of history's most persistent conspiracy theory. The official story is straightforward. Hitler and Eva Braun, whom he'd married just a day earlier, retreated to their private quarters. Hitler shot himself. Braun took cyanide. Their bodies were carried outside, doused with gasoline, and burned. Soviet troops captured the bunker shortly after. They found charred remains which they took back to Moscow. Case closed. Except it wasn't closed. Not even close. The Soviets immediately started spreading confusion. Stalin himself told Allied leaders he believed Hitler had escaped. Soviet propaganda claimed Hitler was alive, hiding in the West, protected by former Nazis and American intelligence. Why would they do this? Because a living Hitler was more useful than a dead one. A living Hitler justified Soviet paranoia, explained their iron grip on Eastern Europe, gave them an enemy to rally against. But here's where it gets interesting. The Soviets did have physical evidence. Skull fragments and dental remains they claimed came from Hitler's body. For decades, they kept these locked away in their archives, refusing to let Western experts examine them. When they finally allowed testing in 2009, researchers made a startling discovery. The skull fragment with the bullet hole, the one supposedly proving Hitler shot himself, belonged to a woman. Not just any woman, but someone between 20 and 40 years old. It definitely wasn't Hitler's skull. So either the Soviets had the wrong remains, or something very different happened in that bunker. The conspiracy theories exploded. If those weren't Hitler's remains, where was he? The most popular theory involved Argentina. According to this version, Hitler escaped Berlin through underground tunnels, made his way to a waiting submarine, and sailed to South America. Argentina had a large German immigrant population and a government sympathetic to fascism. Perfect hiding spot. FBI documents released years later showed the agency took these reports seriously. They investigated multiple claims of Hitler sightings in South America. Some witnesses seemed credible. They described a man matching Hitler's appearance, living quietly in remote areas, protected by loyal followers. The FBI couldn't confirm or debunk these reports definitively. Books appeared claiming to have proof of Hitler's escape. Some pointed to submarine activity off the Argentine coast in the weeks after Germany's surrender. Others referenced testimonies from people who claimed to have helped Hitler flee. A few even provided photographs of elderly men they insisted was the former Führer, living out his days in obscurity. The theories grew more elaborate over time. Some claimed Hitler lived until the 1960s. Others pushed his death date even later. There were stories of secret compounds in the jungle, of Nazi gold funding his exile, of former SS officers standing guard. Each new claim seemed more outlandish than the last. So what really happened? In 2018, French researchers finally got access to examine the dental remains held in Moscow. They compared them to Hitler's dental records, which had been captured by the Allies and included detailed notes from his dentist. The verdict? The teeth were definitely Hitler's. The dental work was unique, matching the records exactly. This means Hitler did die in Berlin. The confusion about the skull fragment can be explained. The Soviets likely mixed up remains from different bodies in the chaos of the bunker. Multiple people died there in those final days, and the burn pit where bodies were disposed of contained multiple sets of remains. The Soviets grabbed what they could, misidentified some of it, then spent decades refusing to admit their mistake. But even with this evidence, the conspiracy theories persist. Some people refuse to accept that Hitler died in that bunker. They point to inconsistencies in witness testimonies, to the Soviets' initial deception, to the fact that nobody Western saw Hitler's body before it was burned. They argue the dental remains could have been faked, or that Hitler's dentist could have been coerced into confirming false evidence. Here's why the Hitler conspiracy theories have such staying power. First, the Soviets deliberately created confusion. Their propaganda campaign gave these theories credibility and official sanction. Second, the circumstances of Hitler's death were chaotic. The witnesses were few, and many didn't survive the war. Third, the idea that history's most evil man simply shot himself in a bunker feels anticlimactic. People want a bigger ending, something that matches the enormity of his crimes. There's also a psychological factor. If Hitler escaped, then he didn't get away with it so easily. If he lived for years in hiding, looking over his shoulder, that's somehow more satisfying than a quick death. It means justice wasn't served, which is disturbing, but it also means his story didn't end on his own terms. The truth is probably the simplest explanation. Hitler saw the end coming. Soviet troops were literally blocks away. He had no escape route, no miracle weapon to save him. So he did what many dictators do when their empires collapse. He took the coward's way out. Eva Braun joined him. Their bodies were burned, and the remains were mishandled by Soviet troops who were more interested in looting than careful documentation. The mystery isn't really whether Hitler died in Berlin. The mystery is why people desperately want to believe he didn't. What does it say about us that we'd rather imagine him living in secret than accept he simply ended his own life when everything fell apart? Hitler's death became a mystery because of deliberate Soviet disinformation, sloppy handling of evidence, and our own inability to accept that monsters sometimes die mundane deaths. The 2018 dental analysis should have closed the case permanently. But conspiracy theories don't die just because evidence contradicts them. They survive because people want them to be true, because they satisfy some psychological need for a more dramatic ending. Nearly 80 years later, we're still talking about what happened in that bunker. Documentaries still explore the escape theories. Books still claim to have new evidence. Websites still analyze grainy photographs of old men, trying to prove they're Hitler in disguise. The man is dead, his regime destroyed, his legacy one of pure evil. But the mystery of his final hours refuses to die. 4 mysteries, 4 decades of investigation, 0 complete answers. That's what makes World War II so fascinating even now. We know how the war started. We know how it ended. But we don't know what happened to the Amber Room, what pilots were seeing in the skies over Europe, what exactly triggered the Battle of Los Angeles, or why Hitler's death became such a tangled web of confusion and conspiracy. These aren't mysteries because we lack information. We have reports, witnesses, evidence, documentation. These are mysteries because the information we have doesn't add up to a clear answer. Something is always missing. A crucial piece of evidence, a reliable witness, a definitive conclusion. The Amber Room could be sitting in a sealed chamber right now, perfectly preserved, waiting for someone to break through the right wall. Or it could have been destroyed in 1945, reduced to ash and splinters. We might never know. The Foo Fighters could have been atmospheric phenomena, mass hallucinations, or something we still don't understand. Hitler definitely died in Berlin, but the conspiracy theories will probably outlive everyone reading these words. That's the nature of historical mysteries. They don't always get solved just because time passes. Sometimes the answers die with the people who knew them. Sometimes evidence gets destroyed or lost or buried too deep to find. Sometimes we're left with questions that will never have satisfying answers. But here's the thing. These mysteries matter. They remind us that history isn't a neat, completed story. It's messy, complicated, full of gaps and contradictions. The more we learn, the more questions we uncover. Every solved mystery reveals 3 new ones waiting to be explored. World War II ended nearly 80 years ago, but its secrets are still coming to light. Archives open, witnesses come forward, new technology allows us to search places we couldn't access before. Maybe someday we'll find the Amber Room. Maybe we'll finally explain the Foo Fighters. Maybe some forgotten document will clear up the Los Angeles battle once and for all. Or maybe these mysteries will remain unsolved forever, permanent reminders that even in our most documented war, some secrets refuse to be captured on paper. That even with millions of witnesses and countless records, the truth can still slip away into darkness. These 4 mysteries represent hundreds more, questions about the war that we'll probably never answer completely. But that doesn't mean we stop looking. History isn't just about knowing what happened. It's about understanding why we care about the gaps, why we keep searching, why we refuse to let these mysteries rest. The Battle of Los Angeles, the Amber Room, the Foo Fighters, Hitler's final hours, 4 unsolved cases from history's deadliest conflict. The answers might be lost forever, but the questions? Those will be with us as long as anyone remembers the war itself.